Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Wagner, and we'll be talking today about a speaking class in particular at the intermediate level, but much of what I'll bring up can apply also at maybe the basic level or upper intermediate level as well. There are two things really that I would like to talk about today. One bigger thing and one smaller thing, more or less. The bigger thing is the second tier collaborative learning and how we can incorporate group work, peer review, pair work, things like that into a speaking class. The second thing is, the smaller thing as I put it, the syllables, adding them and where to place the stress on them. And we'll talk about these in the context of the bigger idea, the collaborative learning and group work issue. Okay, so first let's talk about collaborative learning, and we'll talk a little bit about pair work, then a little bit about group work, and then we'll get into the substance a little bit more. I'm thinking in general right now that this is sort of the first class of the semester, so we'll sort of think of it that way. And basically what I've done in the past, just to break the ice, so to speak, is to ask students to get into pairs and do what we've called an initial interview. And basically, the interview, that's a formal word. It's not exactly that scary of a thing. But what they do is we'll ask two students to get together, and out of the whole class they pair up. Two students will pair together and interview each other. It's a very simple interview. They just ask what their name is, where they're from, why they want to be an English teacher, things like that, what they like to read, anything along those lines. And then the idea is after about 5 minutes, the pairs introduce their partner to the class. And so we'll ask, for example, if we have Claudia and Rodrigo interviewing each other, after about 5 minutes, Claudia will introduce Rodrigo to the class and vice versa. Rodrigo will introduce Claudia. So it should only take about 5 minutes or so, and as it says at the bottom here, this serves a little bit as a diagnostic for the teacher, for us to get an idea of where people are with their speaking abilities with English. And it doesn't put them on the spot so much. It gives them time, it puts them in a little more of a comfortable place to talk. And so that's the first quick thing that I would suggest beginning on the first day with. Okay, a little background on group work first. For most of my classes that I've taught here in Santiago and in the States, in Ohio and North Carolina, I use group work in almost every class, in a speaking class, in a writing class, in a language class. I think it's invaluable, really, and more so for ESL classes, and even more so for speaking classes. And the reason is that group work gives students a sense, well, a lot of things. It gives them a sense of agency, a sense of taking responsibility for their own work. It gives them confidence. It gives them a sense of identity if we keep the groups the same throughout the semester, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it just provides them with, well, it gives them an outlet. They can talk to each other instead of just having a dialogue with the teacher. So, and also they learn from each other, of course. I mean, in my opinion, much of, almost all of teaching and learning comes from experience. We learn from our own experiences and from the experiences of others. And so group work is sort of, we'll focus on that. Gives them a chance to learn from each other's experiences more intimately, so to speak. Okay, so one quick thing I want to talk about here is the idea of keeping groups. I'll talk in a minute about forming groups and et cetera, but one big topic that's come up in several years in the past is whether or not to keep groups the same, keep the students in the same group throughout the semester, throughout the term. And I believe that we should. I think it's better to keep groups the same throughout the semester for the reasons that I just mentioned, and particularly for giving students a sense of identity. If we ask students to get in groups in the very beginning, on the first day, for example today, and we keep that group the same throughout the whole semester, at the end, those things that I mentioned, agency, confidence, etc., they come together with a sense of identity as well. The students identify with their own groups, and therefore that fosters their confidence, etc. Other voices, other teachers have argued that it's good to change the groups every once in a while so that students can mingle, can be with other, can meet other students, work with other students. I think that's valuable, but I think the pros, the positives of keeping the group the same, for the reasons I just mentioned, outweigh that one positive. So, in sum, basically, my suggestion is to keep the groups the same once we establish them. Okay, so I believe the pros outweigh the cons. In choosing groups, there are a couple of ways we can do this, as I'm sure many of you know already. I've seen and I've tried asking students to choose their own groups. For me, that has never worked very well. It ends up as a bit of a mess. And so what I generally do, it's very simple, maybe a little silly even, but I would just number students off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or regarding how big, depending on how big the class is, and then put all of the same numbers in the same group. So all of the 1s would be in a group, all of the 2s would be in a group, etc., all of the 3s. For me, in my experience, that's been the easiest way to establish the groups in the beginning. And then, as I said, we'll keep the groups the same. I think it's very important to keep the groups the same throughout the semester. The other thing, the last that I have up here that I think is equally important is once the groups are set, ask the students to name their groups, to talk to each other and come up with one name for their group. And so, as an example, one of my old professors asked us to get into groups, and she gave us just sort of a guideline. She said, you have to pick a bird, a type of a bird. And so in the class then, I think there were 5 groups. We had one group, the eagles, the condors, etc., the falcons or whatever. So that's what you can do, is you can give them some guidelines like that, choose an animal, choose a bird, etc., or maybe leave it more open and just say, just think up of a name. But it's important that they choose a name for the same reasons I mentioned earlier about keeping the groups the same. It gives them, by the end of the semester, if all goes well, it gives them a sense of identity and the confidence, etc. And so if they have a name, they can identify themselves with that. So, okay, so generally speaking, that's just a few suggestions for setting up the groups on the first day. And so once groups are established and they've named themselves, or they may wait until the next day to name themselves, but once we have our groups, what I like to do, or what I've done in the past, is to give them sort of a simple handout. Each group gets the same handout, maybe a sheet of quotations or a picture. It can be almost anything. One thing I've used in the past, and I hope this can come through, is a picture. I've given my students the same picture here of it's a lemur, basically, a prosimian in Duke University in North Carolina. And what I've done is I've asked students each group to look at this picture and together to invent a brief story, like a little paragraph. What is it? Where did he come from? What's he doing? What does he want? What's his name? Anything like that. The idea here is, and of course I give them some specific instructions, right? You need to work together, write a paragraph telling a brief story about this creature, or whatever you give them. The idea here is to get students to initially sort of invent together, to sort of talk to each other and put a little story together, and that kind of gets them going for the rest of the semester. So as I say here, they discuss, they talk about perhaps this lemur here, and then they write down the responses and pick one member to present is what will happen. So they'll discuss the picture that you give them, they'll think about their story, and a couple of important things here. Everybody in the group should write down the paragraph once they've decided. Once they've decided what a particular quote means, or they think it means, or the story about the lemur, every individual in the group should write down the same paragraph. And I say this for 2 reasons. One, just the process of writing is good. Yeah, it's a speaking class, of course, but all of the 4 skills are connected. It's the process of writing is just, it recycles. It's good for learning English in general, for learning a second language in general. And 2, every individual will have this, or will have all of the things that the group does in the future, so that they can look at it, look at the mistakes when we talk about them, so that they'll have it to refer to and study in the future. So just to recap very quickly, in this sort of group activity, give them their little picture or quotes quick directions, and then together, everybody writes down what they've agreed upon as their one group response. And then they choose